Fearless Mind: How to Control. Fear, Master Emotions, and Become Unstoppable, published by MindForge Audiobooks. Fear controls more people than they realize. Not the kind of fear that threatens survival, but the modern kind. The fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of judgment, the fear of not being enough. Most people live inside invisible mental prisons built by anxiety, overthinking, insecurity, and emotional reactions they barely understand. Every day, fear quietly shapes decisions. It keeps people silent when they should speak, comfortable when they should grow, and distracted when they should focus. It destroys confidence before action is even taken. And over time, this constant emotional avoidance slowly weakens potential, ambition, and self-belief. The truth is, fear today is rarely physical. It is psychological. Your brain constantly imagines worst-case scenarios, creates doubt, and convinces you to stay safe instead of taking risks that could transform your life. The more you overthink, the stronger fear becomes. But this book is not about becoming fearless by eliminating fear completely. Fear will always exist. The goal is to master it instead of obeying it. Fearless people are not fearless because they never feel afraid. They think differently. They act despite uncertainty. They train emotional control, discipline, and mental resilience until fear loses power over their decisions. In this book, you will learn how fear manipulates your mind, how emotional reactions sabotage your growth, and how to develop the confidence, discipline, and emotional strength needed to become mentally unstoppable. Chapter 1. Your brain is designed to fear. Fear is not a flaw in your personality. It is not proof that you are weak, broken, or incapable. Fear is one of the oldest survival systems inside the human brain, and for thousands of years, it helped human beings stay alive in an extremely dangerous world. Long before modern cities, technology, and comfortable lifestyles existed, survival depended on detecting threats quickly. The humans who reacted fastest to danger were the ones who survived long enough to pass their genes to the next generation. Your brain today still carries that ancient survival wiring, even though the world around you has completely changed. This is why fear often feels automatic and uncontrollable. Your brain is not trying to ruin your life. It is trying to protect you, the only way it knows how. Deep inside your brain is a small structure called the amygdala. It acts like an internal alarm system, constantly scanning your environment for danger. Thousands of years ago, that danger might have been a predator hiding in the dark or a life-threatening situation in the wilderness. The moment danger appeared, the amygdala would trigger an immediate survival response. Your heart would beat faster, your muscles would tense, your breathing would change, and your body would prepare to either fight the threat, run away from it, or freeze completely. This system kept humans alive for generations because hesitation in dangerous situations often meant death. The problem is that your brain still reacts this way even when the danger is no longer physical. Modern life rarely involves predators or survival threats, but your brain still interprets emotional discomfort as danger. Rejection, criticism, embarrassment, failure, uncertainty, and social judgment all activate the same fear system that once protected your ancestors from physical harm. This is why speaking in public can feel terrifying. This is why rejection feels painful. This is why criticism can trigger emotional reactions that seem irrational. Your brain treats social threats as survival threats because, throughout human history, being rejected by the tribe could mean isolation, starvation, and death. Even though the world has changed, your nervous system still responds as if your survival is at stake. This explains why fear often feels stronger than logic. You can logically know that sending a message, starting a business, speaking confidently, or chasing a dream is not physically dangerous, yet your body reacts as if something terrible might happen. Your hands shake, your thoughts race, your stomach tightens, and your confidence disappears. This happens because the emotional part of the brain reacts faster than the logical part. Before your rational mind has time to evaluate the situation calmly, your fear system has already activated. Fear is not created by weakness. It is created by biology. One of the most misunderstood things about fear is the fight, flight, and freeze response. Most people know about fight or flight, but few understand how deeply these responses shape everyday behavior. Fight happens when fear turns into aggression, defensiveness, anger, or emotional reactions. A person who becomes angry during criticism is often reacting from fear rather than strength. Flight happens when people avoid discomfort completely. Procrastination, quitting goals, avoiding difficult conversations, and staying inside comfort zones are all forms of escape. Freeze happens when fear becomes paralysis. A person wants to act but feels mentally stuck, overwhelmed, and unable to move forward. Many people live trapped in freeze mode without realizing it. They spend years overthinking, doubting themselves, waiting to feel ready, but never taking action. Fear also becomes stronger through repetition. Every time you avoid something that scares you, your brain learns that the situation must truly be dangerous. Avoidance reinforces fear. If someone avoids public speaking because of anxiety, the brain interprets that escape as proof that speaking is unsafe. The next time the opportunity appears, the fear becomes even stronger. This is how fear slowly builds mental prisons around people's lives. The comfort zone feels safe temporarily, but over time it becomes smaller and smaller until even simple risks feel overwhelming. Modern life makes this problem even worse because humans are constantly exposed to psychological stress. Social media, comparison, pressure to succeed, financial anxiety, uncertainty about the future, and constant information overload keep the brain in a state of alertness. The nervous system was never designed to process endless notifications, opinions, comparisons, and stimulation every day. As a result, many people live with constant low-level fear without even recognizing it. They become emotionally reactive, mentally exhausted, distracted, anxious, and disconnected from themselves. Their brain stays trapped in survival mode instead of growth mode. Overthinking is another major reason fear feels so powerful. The brain believes that thinking more creates safety. It constantly searches for worst-case scenarios in an attempt to protect you from pain or failure. But instead of creating protection, overthinking creates paralysis. The more the brain analyzes uncertainty, the more dangerous the situation appears. Eventually, imagined problems become more frightening than reality itself. Most fears exist far more intensely inside the mind than in the real world. People suffer more from imagination than from actual experience. Fear also explains why growth feels uncomfortable. Every time you try something new, uncertain, or challenging, your brain interprets it as potential danger because it moves beyond familiarity. Your nervous system prefers predictability because predictable situations feel safer. This is why staying the same often feels easier than changing, even when change would improve your life. The brain values survival more than success. It would rather keep you safe and limited than risk discomfort for growth. But understanding fear changes everything. Once you realize that fear is a protective system rather than proof of weakness, you stop seeing yourself as broken. Fear is not your enemy. It is simply an outdated survival mechanism trying to protect you from uncertainty. The goal is not to eliminate fear completely, because that is impossible. The goal is to retrain your relationship with it. Fearless people still feel fear. The difference is that they no longer obey it automatically. The strongest people are not those who never feel afraid. They are the people who understand fear, but continue moving forward anyway. They recognize that growth always feels uncomfortable at first. They understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. Every time you act despite fear, you teach your brain that the situation is survivable. Slowly, the nervous system adapts, confidence grows, fear weakens. This is how mental strength is built. Your brain was designed to fear because fear once kept humans alive. But in the modern world, survival is no longer enough. To grow, succeed, lead, create, and become your highest self, you must learn how to work with your fear instead of surrendering to it. The moment you stop seeing fear as weakness and start seeing it as a biological response you can train through, you take the first real step toward becoming fearless. Chapter 2. Fear controls more of your life than you realize. Most people believe fear only appears during obvious moments of danger. They think fear is standing on the edge of a cliff, facing physical risk, or walking into something clearly terrifying. But the most powerful fears are usually invisible. They hide beneath everyday habits, behaviors, excuses, and decisions so quietly that people rarely recognize them. Fear is not only panic or anxiety. Fear often disguises itself as procrastination, perfectionism, comfort, overthinking, self-doubt, and emotional avoidance. It silently controls choices, limits potential, and shapes entire lives without people realizing it. One of the clearest examples of hidden fear is procrastination. Most people think procrastination happens because they are lazy, unmotivated, or undisciplined. But laziness is rarely the real problem. In many cases, procrastination is emotional protection. When a task feels difficult, uncertain, or emotionally uncomfortable, the brain searches for ways to escape the discomfort. Delaying the task creates temporary relief, and the brain mistakes that relief for safety. This is why people scroll endlessly on their phones instead of working on important goals. It is why someone avoids starting a business, writing a book, applying for opportunities, or having difficult conversations. The issue is not lack of capability. The issue is fear. Fear of failure is one of the strongest emotional forces in human psychology. The brain constantly asks dangerous questions. What if I fail? What if people laugh at me? What if I embarrass myself? What if I'm not good enough? These thoughts create emotional discomfort, and the mind escapes that discomfort through delay. The problem is that procrastination never truly removes fear. It only postpones it while quietly destroying confidence and momentum. Every time you avoid action, you strengthen the belief that you are incapable of handling discomfort. Over time, procrastination becomes a prison disguised as temporary comfort. Fear also controls people through rejection and judgment. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and for thousands of years, survival depended on belonging to a tribe or community. Because of this, the brain treats social rejection as a serious threat. Even today, people fear embarrassment, criticism, and judgment as if their survival depends on avoiding them. This explains why so many people hide their real thoughts, dreams, talents, and ambitions. They are terrified of being misunderstood or criticized. Many people never chase the life they truly want because they are emotionally trapped by the opinions of others. They stay quiet in meetings even when they have valuable ideas. They avoid creating content because they fear negative comments. They remain stuck in unfulfilling careers because they fear what family or society might think if they choose differently. They suppress their authentic identity to avoid disapproval. the fear of judgment becomes stronger than the desire for freedom. Social media has amplified this fear dramatically. People now live in constant comparison, constantly exposed to carefully edited versions of other people's lives. Every post, opinion, success story, and achievement becomes another source of self-doubt. Instead of focusing on growth, people become obsessed with perception. They fear looking imperfect. They fear appearing unsuccessful. They fear not measuring up. As a result, many individuals spend more energy protecting their image than improving their actual lives. Perfectionism is another form of hidden fear that destroys progress quietly. Many people believe perfectionism is a sign of high standards or ambition, but in reality, perfectionism is often fear wearing a mask. Perfectionists delay action because they fear mistakes, criticism, and imperfection. They spend endless time planning, researching, and preparing because starting feels emotionally risky. They tell themselves they are waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect strategy, or the perfect version of themselves. But perfection is impossible, and waiting for it becomes another form of avoidance. Fear hidden inside perfectionism is dangerous because it feels productive. Someone spends months planning a project instead of launching it. Someone rewrites the same work repeatedly instead of sharing it. Someone delays opportunities because they believe they are not fully ready yet. But underneath all of this behavior is the same emotional truth: fear of being seen imperfectly. Perfectionism creates the illusion of control while secretly preventing growth. There's also a powerful fear that few people openly discuss: the fear of success. At first, this sounds irrational. Why would anyone fear success? But success creates responsibility, visibility, pressure, and change. Success forces people to grow beyond familiar identities and environments. Many individuals unconsciously sabotage opportunities because success would require them to become someone new. It would require higher expectations, greater discipline, and emotional discomfort. Some people fear losing relationships if they become successful. Others fear standing out too much. Some fear the pressure of maintaining success once they achieve it. As a result, they unconsciously stay small. They procrastinate, overthink, quit early, or settle for less than they are capable of achieving. The brain often prefers familiar struggle over unfamiliar growth because familiarity feels safer. This is why comfort zones are so dangerous. The comfort zone feels secure because it minimizes uncertainty, but comfort slowly weakens the human spirit. Growth always requires discomfort because growth involves entering unfamiliar territory. Every new level of life demands emotional adaptation, but the brain interprets uncertainty as danger, so people remain trapped inside routines, environments, and identities that no longer serve them simply because they feel predictable. The tragedy is that comfort zones do not actually create peace. They create stagnation. People often feel restless, frustrated, and unfulfilled inside lives they have emotionally outgrown. Deep down, they know they are capable of more, but fear keeps them emotionally attached to safety. Over time, avoiding discomfort creates regret far greater than the discomfort itself. Fear also appears through emotional avoidance patterns. Many people spend their lives running from emotions they do not want to feel. They distract themselves constantly because silence forces them to confront uncomfortable truths. They overwork to avoid loneliness. They binge entertainment to avoid anxiety. They seek validation to avoid insecurity. They remain busy not because productivity fulfills them, but because stillness exposes emotional pain they have never learned to process. This emotional avoidance creates long-term suffering because unprocessed fear does not disappear. It stays hidden beneath behavior, influencing decisions silently. People think they are making logical choices when, In reality, fear is controlling them from beneath the surface. Fear determines who they become, what risks they avoid, what opportunities they reject, and how small they allow themselves to live. The most dangerous thing about fear is that it rarely announces itself clearly. It speaks through excuses that sound reasonable. It says, "I'll start later." It says, "I'm not ready yet." It says, "What if it doesn't work?" It says, "Maybe I should wait." Over time, these thoughts become normal, and people stop questioning them. Entire lives become shaped by invisible fear patterns operating automatically in the background. But awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize fear hiding behind your habits and decisions, you regain power. You begin seeing procrastination differently. You begin noticing avoidance patterns. You recognize perfectionism as emotional protection rather than excellence. You understand that comfort is not always safety, and that growth often feels uncomfortable because your brain is resisting uncertainty. Fear controls most people not because they are weak, but because they never learned how fear actually operates. They confuse fear with reality. They obey emotional discomfort automatically instead of questioning it. But once you understand that fear silently shapes your decisions, you can begin breaking its control. You stop asking, "How do I avoid fear?" and start asking, "How do I act despite fear?" That shift changes everything. Chapter 3. Overthinking is fear in disguise. Most people believe overthinking is a sign of intelligence. They assume that constantly analyzing situations, replaying conversations, imagining possibilities, and questioning every decision means they are being careful, responsible, or thoughtful. But in reality, overthinking is often fear hiding behind excessive thinking. It is the brain's attempt to create certainty in an uncertain world. The problem is that no amount of thinking can remove uncertainty completely. Instead, overthinking traps people inside endless mental loops that drain confidence, destroy peace, and prevent action. The human brain is designed to search for safety. Thousands of years ago, anticipating danger increased survival. The brain evolved to constantly scan for potential threats, problems, and worst-case scenarios because failing to detect danger could mean death. In the modern world, physical threats are far less common, but the brain still operates with the same survival wiring. Instead of worrying about predators or survival in nature, people now overthink social situations, careers, relationships, finances, future uncertainty, and personal identity. The brain treats emotional uncertainty as danger and tries to solve it through thinking. This is why uncertainty feels so uncomfortable. The brain hates what it cannot predict or control. Whenever life becomes unclear, the mind immediately begins searching for answers. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if I make the wrong decision? What if something bad happens later? These questions create anxiety because the brain believes uncertainty equals risk. Overthinking becomes an attempt to mentally prepare for every possible outcome in order to feel safe. The problem is that the mind confuses thinking with control. People believe that if they think hard enough, analyze deeply enough, or plan carefully enough, they can eliminate mistakes, avoid pain, and guarantee success. But this is an illusion. Life will always contain uncertainty. No amount of mental analysis can predict every outcome or prevent every challenge. Overthinking creates the false feeling of productivity while secretly keeping people stuck. Many individuals spend years trapped inside this illusion. They research endlessly instead of starting. They plan endlessly instead of acting. They replay conversations repeatedly, searching for hidden meanings. They imagine future disasters that never happen. They wait until they feel completely certain before taking action. But certainty never arrives. As a result, life remains paused while the mind stays busy. This is what creates paralysis by analysis. The more options, possibilities, and outcomes the brain considers, the harder decision-making becomes. Instead of gaining clarity, excessive thinking creates confusion. Every decision starts feeling dangerous because the brain can imagine endless ways things could fail. The person becomes emotionally overwhelmed by possibilities and eventually avoids action entirely. Paralysis by analysis quietly destroys potential. Someone dreams of starting a business, but spends years consuming information instead of building anything. Someone wants to change careers, but remains trapped in endless comparison and doubt. Someone wants to express feelings to another person, but overthinks every possible rejection until silence feels safer. The tragedy is not lack of intelligence or talent. The tragedy is excessive mental fear disguised as preparation. One of the most exhausting aspects of overthinking is the creation of mental loops. The brain continuously replays the same thoughts without reaching resolution. A person revisits conversations repeatedly, wondering if they said the wrong thing. They imagine future situations repeatedly, trying to mentally rehearse every outcome. They relive past mistakes over and over again, hoping to somehow change what already happened. But these mental loops never create peace because the brain is not actually solving problems. It is trapped in emotional survival mode. The mind also has a tendency to create imagined scenarios that feel emotionally real. A person imagines failure so vividly that the body reacts with genuine anxiety, even though nothing has actually happened. The brain cannot always distinguish between real danger and vividly imagined danger. This is why overthinking creates physical exhaustion. The nervous system stays activated as if the imagined problems are actually occurring in reality. Someone who overthinks a future presentation may experience racing thoughts, stress, muscle tension, and fear days before the event even happens. Someone who fears rejection may emotionally suffer for weeks because of conversations that exist only in imagination. The brain continuously simulates negative possibilities in an attempt to prepare for pain, but this preparation often creates more suffering than the actual situation itself. Overthinking also destroys confidence because confidence depends on action, not endless thought. Every time a person hesitates excessively, doubts themselves repeatedly, or avoids decisions because of fear, they unconsciously train the brain to believe they are incapable. Confidence is built through movement, experience, and evidence. But overthinking interrupts action before evidence can ever be created. This is why highly intelligent people often remain stuck, while less analytical people move forward faster. Overthinkers wait for certainty, while action-oriented individuals learn through experience. The overthinker tries to mentally eliminate all risk before acting, but the person taking action gains confidence through real-world feedback. Over time, the gap becomes enormous. One person builds momentum, while the other remains trapped inside thought. Fear grows stronger in stillness. The longer the mind sits with uncertainty without action, the larger the fear becomes. A small challenge slowly transforms into a terrifying mental obstacle because imagination magnifies it repeatedly. The brain begins attaching emotional weight to situations far beyond their actual size. What could have been solved through one conversation, one decision, or one attempt becomes emotionally overwhelming, simply because it remained inside the mind too long. This is why action kills fear faster than thinking. Action interrupts the mental loop. It gives the brain real information instead of imagined danger. The moment someone takes action, uncertainty decreases because reality replaces imagination. Even failure becomes less frightening once experienced because the unknown disappears. Most fears lose power the moment they are confronted directly. A person terrified of public speaking gains more confidence from giving one speech than from spending months overthinking speeches. A person afraid of rejection gains more emotional strength from honest experience than from endless mental preparation. A person fearful of starting something new develops courage through movement, not through more thinking. Action teaches the nervous system that discomfort is survivable. This does not mean people should act recklessly without reflection. Thinking itself is not the enemy. The problem begins when thinking becomes emotional avoidance. Healthy thinking leads to decisions and movement. Overthinking creates endless hesitation without resolution. Productive thought creates clarity. Fear-based thinking creates paralysis. Breaking the cycle of overthinking requires learning how to tolerate uncertainty instead of trying to eliminate it completely. This is difficult because the brain naturally seeks control, but emotional maturity comes from understanding that certainty is impossible. No relationship, career path, opportunity, or life decision comes with guarantees. Waiting to feel fully certain before acting guarantees stagnation. One of the most powerful ways to break overthinking is to shorten the distance between thought and action. The longer you wait after fear appears, the stronger the fear becomes. The brain starts building stories, scenarios, and emotional resistance. But when action happens quickly, fear has less time to grow. Courage is often created through immediate movement rather than emotional readiness. Another important step is recognizing that thoughts are not facts. Overthinkers often treat every anxious thought as truth instead of mental noise. Just because the brain imagines disaster does not mean disaster will happen. The mind is designed to predict danger, but predictions are not reality. Learning to observe thoughts without obeying them immediately is a major step toward mental freedom. Stillness and self-awareness are also important because overthinking often becomes automatic. Many people are constantly stimulated by noise, distraction, social media, and information. Their minds never rest. As a result, they become disconnected from themselves. Quiet reflection allows people to notice mental patterns more clearly. They begin seeing how often fear disguises itself as excessive thinking. Perfectionism also feeds overthinking because the brain believes mistakes are unacceptable. The person constantly analyzes decisions because they fear choosing incorrectly. But life is not built through perfect choices. Growth comes through adjustment, adaptation, and learning from imperfect experiences. People who move forward despite uncertainty gain wisdom far faster than those waiting for flawless conditions. At its core, overthinking is an attempt to emotionally protect yourself from pain, failure, rejection, or uncertainty. But ironically, excessive thinking often creates the very suffering it tries to avoid. It steals peace from the present moment. It destroys momentum. It drains emotional energy. It creates self-doubt. It delays growth. And over time, it slowly convinces people to live smaller lives than they are capable of living. Fearless people are not fearless because they never think deeply. They simply refuse to let thought replace action. They understand that courage is built through movement. They know uncertainty is part of life. They trust themselves enough to handle whatever happens instead of demanding guarantees before they begin. The goal is not to stop thinking completely. The goal is to stop allowing fear-based thinking to control your life. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be risks, unknowns, and possibilities of failure. But there is also growth, transformation, confidence, and freedom waiting on the other side of action. At some point, you must stop rehearsing life inside your head and start living it in reality. Chapter 4. Emotional reactions are making you weak. Most people believe emotions are meant to be followed automatically. If they feel angry, they express anger immediately. If they feel anxious, they avoid the situation. If they feel hurt, they react impulsively. Modern culture often encourages emotional expression without emotional control, convincing people that reacting instantly is honesty or authenticity. But uncontrolled emotional reactions are not strength. In many cases, they are signs of weak self-control. A person who cannot manage emotions becomes controlled by emotions, and the moment emotions control your behavior, your life becomes unstable. There is a massive difference between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic. It happens instantly without awareness or control. Responding is intentional. It creates space between emotion and behavior. Most people spend their lives reacting because emotional reactions feel natural. Someone says something disrespectful, and anger immediately takes over. A stressful situation appears, and anxiety controls decision-making. Criticism arrives, and defensiveness appears instantly. The person feels emotionally attacked, so they respond impulsively without thinking clearly. The problem is that emotions are temporary states, but emotional reactions often create permanent consequences. One angry message can destroy a relationship. One impulsive decision can ruin opportunities. One emotional outburst can damage trust built over years. Many people spend their lives trying to repair damage caused by moments they failed to control themselves emotionally. The brain is designed to prioritize survival over logic. When emotions become intense, the emotional part of the brain activates faster than the rational part. This is why strong emotions hijack decision-making. During moments of fear, anger, embarrassment, or stress, people often behave in ways they later regret. Their ability to think long-term disappears because the brain becomes focused on immediate emotional relief rather than wise decisions. Anger is one of the clearest examples of emotional hijacking. Anger itself is not always bad. Sometimes anger signals injustice, disrespect, or violated boundaries. But uncontrolled anger becomes destructive. An angry person says things they do not truly mean because emotion overrides wisdom. They become impulsive, defensive, aggressive, and irrational. The emotional reaction feels powerful in the moment, but afterward it often creates regret, shame, and damaged relationships. Many people mistake emotional explosiveness for strength because anger creates temporary feelings of control. But true strength is not losing control. True strength is remaining calm when emotions are intense. Anyone can react impulsively. Emotional discipline is much harder. A person who stays composed under pressure demonstrates real inner power because they are not controlled by temporary feelings. Anxiety creates a different kind of emotional weakness. While anger pushes people toward aggression, anxiety pushes them toward avoidance. Fearful thoughts become so emotionally overwhelming that people stop taking action entirely. They avoid opportunities, conversations, risks, and growth because emotional discomfort feels unbearable. Anxiety convinces the brain that avoidance creates safety, but avoidance slowly weakens confidence. Every time someone avoids discomfort because of anxiety, the brain learns that fear should be obeyed. Over time, this creates emotional fragility. Small challenges begin feeling overwhelming because the nervous system never learns resilience. A person who constantly escapes discomfort eventually loses trust in their own ability to handle life. Impulsive behavior is another consequence of emotional reactivity. Many people make decisions based on temporary emotions instead of long-term thinking. They spend money impulsively because they feel stressed. They end relationships impulsively because they feel hurt. They quit goals impulsively because they feel discouraged. Emotional reactions create short-term relief while quietly creating long-term problems. This is why emotionally reactive people often experience unstable lives. Their decisions change constantly depending on mood, stress, and emotional state. They feel motivated one day and hopeless the next. They make promises during emotional highs and abandon them during emotional lows. Without emotional stability, consistency becomes impossible. Emotional reactivity also destroys relationships more than people realize. Most relationship conflicts are not caused by the original problem itself. They are caused by emotional reactions to the problem. One person feels misunderstood and reacts defensively. The other feels attacked and reacts aggressively. Instead of solving the issue calmly, both people become emotionally consumed by protecting themselves. Words spoken during emotional reactions often create wounds that last much longer than the original disagreement. Trust slowly erodes when people feel emotionally unsafe around someone. A person who constantly explodes with anger, withdraws emotionally, or reacts impulsively becomes unpredictable. Others begin walking on eggshells around them because they never know what emotional version of the person will appear. Over time, emotional instability damages intimacy, trust, communication, and respect. Many relationships fail not because love disappeared, but because emotional maturity never developed. A person who cannot regulate emotions struggles to maintain healthy connection because relationships require patience, self-awareness, and emotional control during difficult moments. There's also a hidden cost to losing emotional control that many people never recognize. Emotional reactivity drains enormous mental energy. Constant stress, anger, anxiety, and emotional chaos exhaust the nervous system. The body remains trapped in survival mode, releasing stress hormones repeatedly. This affects sleep, focus, health, productivity, and peace of mind. Emotionally reactive people often live in constant internal tension. Their thoughts race constantly. Their emotions fluctuate rapidly. Small problems feel enormous. They become mentally exhausted because the nervous system never fully relaxes. Emotional instability slowly steals clarity and peace from daily life. The solution is not suppressing emotions completely. Emotional suppression is not strength either. Ignoring pain, pretending emotions do not exist, or becoming emotionally numb only creates deeper problems later. Real emotional strength comes from awareness and discipline. It means feeling emotions fully without allowing them to control behavior automatically. Self-awareness is the beginning of emotional mastery. Most people react unconsciously because they never pause long enough to observe themselves. They become emotions instead of observing emotions. The moment anger appears, they identify completely with it. The moment anxiety appears, they surrender to it automatically. But emotionally strong people create space between feeling and action. They notice emotions without immediately obeying them. They recognize that emotions are temporary internal experiences, not commands that must be followed instantly. This small shift changes everything. Someone with emotional discipline can feel anger without becoming destructive. They can feel fear without running away. They can feel sadness without collapsing emotionally. They understand that emotions provide information, but emotions should not control decisions entirely. Building emotional strength requires practice because emotional reactions are deeply wired habits. The brain prefers automatic responses because they require less conscious effort. But every time a person pauses, instead of reacting impulsively, they strengthen self-control. Every time they stay calm under pressure, they build emotional resilience. Every time they choose long-term wisdom over temporary emotional relief, they become mentally stronger. One of the most important emotional skills is learning to tolerate discomfort. Most impulsive reactions happen because people want to escape uncomfortable emotions immediately. They want relief from anger, fear, embarrassment, rejection, or anxiety as fast as possible. But emotional strength grows when you stop treating discomfort as an emergency. Discomfort is part of growth. Difficult conversations, criticism, uncertainty, failure, and emotional pain are unavoidable parts of life. A person who learns how to remain emotionally stable during discomfort becomes incredibly powerful because they stop being controlled by temporary emotional states. Calmness under pressure is not weakness. It is mastery. The strongest individuals are often the calmest because they understand that emotional reactions usually create more problems than solutions. They do not waste energy proving themselves emotionally. They focus on clarity, wisdom, and intentional action. Fearless people are not fearless because they never feel strong emotions. They feel emotions deeply, but they refuse to let emotions dominate their choices. They understand that emotional control is one of the greatest forms of personal power a human being can develop. The moment you stop reacting automatically and start responding intentionally, your entire life begins to change. Your decisions improve. Your relationships strengthen. Your confidence grows. Your mind becomes calmer. And most importantly, you stop becoming a prisoner of temporary emotions. That is real strength. Chapter 5. Confidence is built through discomfort. Most people spend their lives waiting to feel confident before they take action. They believe confidence must appear first, and only then will they finally start the business, speak up, chase opportunities, take risks, or become the person they want to be. But this belief keeps millions of people trapped in hesitation for years. Confidence does not come before action. Confidence is created because of action. It is built through movement, discomfort, uncertainty, and repeated exposure to challenges that once felt frightening. This is one of the biggest psychological misunderstandings people have about personal growth. They imagine confident people were somehow born different, naturally fearless, emotionally strong, and mentally prepared. But in reality, confidence is not something people are given. It is something they build. Every confident person was once uncertain. Every courageous person once felt afraid. The difference is that they acted anyway. The human brain naturally avoids discomfort because discomfort signals uncertainty, and uncertainty feels dangerous. The nervous system prefers familiarity because familiar situations feel predictable and emotionally safe. This is why comfort zones are so seductive. Inside the comfort zone, life feels controlled, manageable, and emotionally secure. There is less anxiety, less risk, and less emotional exposure. But comfort comes with a hidden cost. Nothing grows inside comfort for very long. A comfort zone may protect you from temporary fear, but it also protects you from growth, confidence, opportunity, and transformation. The longer people stay trapped in emotional comfort, the weaker their tolerance for discomfort becomes. Small challenges start feeling overwhelming because the nervous system never learns how to adapt. This is why people who constantly avoid discomfort often become emotionally fragile over time. Life itself becomes harder because they never trained themselves to handle difficulty. Growth requires discomfort because growth always involves entering unfamiliar territory. Every new skill, relationship, opportunity, or identity begins with uncertainty. The brain interprets this uncertainty as danger, which creates fear. But fear during growth is normal. It does not mean you are incapable. It means you are stepping beyond what feels familiar. This is why confidence is always built after action, not before it. The nervous system learns through experience, not through endless thinking. A person does not become confident at public speaking by imagining confidence. They become confident by speaking repeatedly, despite fear. Someone does not become socially confident by waiting to feel ready. They become confident by facing uncomfortable interactions over and over until the nervous system adapts. The brain changes through exposure. This process is known as nervous system adaptation. Whenever you repeatedly face something uncomfortable without avoiding it, the brain slowly learns that the situation is survivable. What once felt terrifying gradually becomes normal. Fear weakens because the nervous system stops treating the experience as a threat. This is why exposure is one of the most powerful psychological tools for overcoming fear. Every time you face discomfort directly, you send a message to your brain: I can survive this. Slowly, the emotional intensity decreases. Confidence begins growing naturally because the brain now has evidence of capability. Avoidance creates the opposite effect. Every time you run from discomfort, the brain interprets the escape as proof that the situation is dangerous. Fear grows stronger because avoidance reinforces emotional weakness. This is why comfort zones shrink over time. The more fear is obeyed, the more powerful it becomes. Small wins are incredibly important in this process because confidence is built through evidence. The brain changes identity through repeated experiences. A person who constantly avoids challenges unconsciously builds the identity of someone weak, fearful, or incapable. But small, courageous actions slowly create a different identity. Every time you face discomfort, even in small ways, you build proof that you are stronger than your fear. Speaking up once creates evidence. Taking one risk creates evidence. Having one difficult conversation creates evidence. Staying calm during discomfort creates evidence. These small moments seem insignificant at first, but over time they completely transform self-perception. Confidence is not one giant breakthrough moment. It is the accumulation of small victories repeated consistently. Most people underestimate the power of tiny acts of courage because they are obsessed with dramatic transformation. But lasting confidence is built slowly through repeated exposure to discomfort. This is also why courage is often misunderstood. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action despite fear. Fearless people still feel nervous, uncertain, and uncomfortable. They simply stop waiting for those emotions to disappear before taking action. They understand something powerful. Feelings often follow behavior. Most people think they must feel brave first and then act bravely. But psychologically, the opposite is true. Acting bravely creates bravery. The brain gains confidence through evidence generated by action. Waiting to feel ready usually leads nowhere because readiness is not a feeling that magically appears. Readiness is created through movement. This is why many fearless people act before they feel prepared. They understand that perfection and certainty are illusions. If they waited until all fear disappeared, they would remain stuck forever. Instead, they train themselves to move while uncomfortable. They stop seeing discomfort as a signal to retreat and start seeing it as a signal for growth. There is a major psychological shift that happens when someone stops avoiding discomfort. They begin trusting themselves more deeply. The fear itself becomes less important because they develop confidence in their ability to handle fear. This changes everything. At first, discomfort feels overwhelming because the brain is unfamiliar with it. But over time, emotional resilience develops. Difficult conversations become easier. Rejection becomes less painful. Failure becomes less terrifying. Uncertainty becomes more manageable. The person stops treating discomfort as danger and starts treating it as part of growth. This transformation creates freedom because fear loses control over decision-making. Many people are trapped not because they lack ability, but because they are emotionally addicted to comfort. They structure their entire lives around avoiding discomfort, and in doing so, they unknowingly avoid growth itself. The irony is that avoiding discomfort often creates greater suffering later. The discomfort of discipline is avoided, so health declines. The discomfort of honest conversations is avoided, so relationships weaken. The discomfort of taking risks is avoided, so regret grows. Temporary comfort creates long-term dissatisfaction. But people who train themselves to tolerate discomfort experience the opposite effect. Short-term discomfort creates long-term strength. The difficult workout builds health. The uncomfortable conversation builds connection. The risky opportunity creates growth. The repeated exposure to fear creates confidence. One of the most important things to understand is that confidence is not permanent. It must be continuously reinforced through action. Every new level of life introduces new fears and uncertainties. But once someone learns how confidence is truly built, they stop being controlled by those fears. They understand that discomfort is not evidence of inability. It is evidence of expansion. Mentally strong people develop a different relationship with discomfort. They stop asking, "How do I avoid fear?" and begin asking, "What does this fear require me to become?" They recognize that every uncomfortable situation contains an opportunity to strengthen the nervous system and expand identity. This does not mean seeking unnecessary suffering or pretending discomfort feels pleasant. It means understanding that growth and discomfort are deeply connected. You cannot build confidence while constantly protecting yourself from challenge. The very experiences that scare you often contain the exact growth you need. Eventually, something powerful begins happening. The situations that once terrified you no longer control you emotionally. The nervous system adapts, confidence expands, self-trust deepens. You stop seeing yourself as fragile because you now have evidence that you can handle difficult things. And that is the real secret behind fearless people. They are not fearless because life became easier for them. They became fearless because they repeatedly walked through discomfort until discomfort stopped controlling them. Confidence was never waiting for you before action. It was waiting for you on the other side of it. Chapter 6. Fear of judgment is destroying your potential. One of the strongest fears controlling human behavior is not the fear of failure, pain, or uncertainty. It is the fear of judgment. Most people are not living according to their true potential because they are emotionally trapped by the opinions of others. They constantly wonder how they are being perceived, whether they are being accepted, whether people approve of them, and whether they might embarrass themselves if they fully express who they really are. This invisible fear silently shapes decisions, limits confidence, and keeps millions of people living small, hidden lives. Human beings are biologically wired to seek social approval. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a tribe or community. Being accepted by the group meant protection, resources, and survival. Rejection often meant danger, isolation, or death. Because of this evolutionary history, the human brain still treats social judgment as a threat. Even though modern rejection rarely threatens survival physically, the nervous system reacts emotionally as if acceptance is still a matter of life and death. This is why embarrassment feels so painful. It is not just an uncomfortable emotion. To the brain, public humiliation or rejection activates deep survival fears. A person may logically understand that making a mistake, being criticized, or looking awkward will not destroy them, but emotionally the experience still feels threatening. The body responds with anxiety, stress, racing thoughts, and self-consciousness because the brain interprets social exposure as danger. This fear controls behavior more than people realize. Many individuals never speak honestly because they fear sounding foolish. They never pursue creative work because they fear criticism. They never start businesses because they fear failure becoming public. They never share ideas, talents, or ambitions because they fear being judged. Entire identities remain hidden behind emotional protection. The tragedy is that most people are not rejected by the world. They reject themselves first out of fear of possible judgment. Before anyone else can criticize them, they silence themselves. Before anyone else can reject them, they avoid visibility entirely. Fear convinces them that staying invisible is safer than risking exposure. Social media has dramatically intensified this fear. Human beings were never psychologically designed to receive constant comparison, evaluation, and validation from hundreds or thousands of people every day. Platforms built around attention and approval have created environments where self-worth becomes tied to likes, comments, followers, and external reactions. Instead of living authentically, many people begin performing for approval. Social media constantly exposes individuals to carefully edited versions of other people's lives. People compare their insecurities to someone else's highlights. They compare their unfinished reality to someone else's polished image. This creates endless feelings of inadequacy because comparison naturally magnifies self-doubt. The brain begins asking dangerous questions. Am I attractive enough? Successful enough? Smart enough? Interesting enough? Popular enough? Over time, people become emotionally dependent on external feedback to feel valuable. This creates the trap of validation addiction. Validation itself is not inherently bad. Human beings naturally enjoy encouragement and recognition. The problem begins when self-worth becomes dependent on outside approval. A person addicted to validation constantly changes behavior to maintain acceptance. They say what others want to hear instead of what they truly believe. They suppress authenticity to avoid conflict or criticism. They become emotionally controlled by public perception. Validation addiction is dangerous because it places emotional control in the hands of strangers, audiences, or social groups. The person no longer lives according to personal values. They live according to reactions. Praise creates temporary confidence, while criticism creates emotional collapse. Their identity becomes unstable because it is built externally instead of internally. This is why many people stay invisible. Visibility creates vulnerability. The moment someone expresses themselves openly, they risk criticism, misunderstanding, rejection, or failure. Remaining hidden feels emotionally safer because invisibility protects the ego from exposure. But invisibility also destroys potential. There are people with extraordinary ideas who never share them, talented individuals who never create, intelligent minds who remain silent, creative people who abandon dreams because they fear looking foolish. Entire futures disappear because people choose emotional safety over self-expression. Fear of judgment also creates emotional exhaustion because constantly managing perception requires enormous energy. People become obsessed with how they appear instead of focusing on who they are becoming. They overanalyze conversations, replay interactions, and constantly seek reassurance. Their minds become consumed with social survival rather than meaningful growth. The reality is that trying to avoid judgment completely is impossible. No matter what you do, some people will misunderstand you, criticize you, dislike you, or disagree with you. This is part of being human. Even the most successful, respected, and admired individuals in history faced rejection and criticism. The problem is not judgment itself. The problem is allowing fear of judgment to control your choices. Fearless people understand something deeply important. Other people's opinions are unstable and temporary. Public approval changes constantly. Someone who praises you today may criticize you tomorrow. Building identity around external reactions creates emotional instability because public opinion is unpredictable. This is why learning to detach from opinions is one of the most important psychological skills a person can develop. Detachment does not mean becoming arrogant, careless, or emotionally disconnected. It means refusing to allow outside opinions to define your self-worth completely. It means understanding that criticism does not automatically make you worthless, and praise does not automatically make you valuable. People who develop emotional independence stop living for applause. They begin focusing on alignment with their own values, goals, and truth. They stop asking, "Will everyone approve of me?" and start asking, "Am I living honestly?" This shift creates enormous freedom because decisions become guided by purpose instead of fear. Building internal validation is essential for real confidence. Internal validation means your sense of worth comes from your own character, discipline, growth, and integrity rather than constant outside approval. You trust your own judgment. You respect yourself because of how you live, not because of how loudly others praise you. This kind of confidence is much stronger because it remains stable even when criticism appears. A person with internal validation can handle rejection without collapsing emotionally because their identity is not fully dependent on acceptance. They understand that disagreement is part of life, not evidence of failure. Internal validation is built through self-respect. Every time you act according to your values despite fear, self-trust grows. Every time you stay authentic instead of performing for approval, confidence deepens. Every time you face judgment without abandoning yourself, emotional strength increases. One of the hardest but most liberating realizations in life is understanding that people think about you far less than you imagine. Most individuals are too busy worrying about themselves, their insecurities, and their own lives to constantly analyze yours. The fear of judgment often exists more intensely inside the mind than in reality itself. And even when judgment does happen, it rarely destroys you. Embarrassment feels painful temporarily, but survival continues. Rejection hurts, but life moves forward. Criticism stings, but growth remains possible. The emotional fear is usually far greater than the actual consequence. Fearless people are not fearless because nobody judges them. They are fearless because they stop making approval their highest priority. They understand that living authentically will always attract both acceptance and criticism, but they would rather face temporary judgment than permanent regret from hiding who they truly are. At some point, every person must decide which pain is worse, the pain of being judged or the pain of never fully becoming themselves. Because the greatest tragedy is not criticism. The greatest tragedy is spending your entire life invisible because you were too afraid to be seen. Chapter 7. Discipline defeats fear. Most people spend their lives waiting for motivation. They wait to feel inspired before taking action. They wait to feel confident before becoming disciplined. They wait for the perfect mood, the perfect energy, or the perfect moment to finally change their lives. But motivation is unreliable because emotions constantly change. Some days you feel focused and energized. Other days you feel tired, uncertain, distracted, or emotionally drained. If your actions depend entirely on emotions, consistency becomes impossible. This is why discipline is far more powerful than motivation. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is behavioral. Motivation comes and goes, but discipline creates stability. A disciplined person continues moving forward even when emotions fluctuate, because their behavior is no longer controlled entirely by feelings. And this is exactly why discipline defeats fear. Fear becomes powerful when emotions control action. A fearful mind constantly searches for comfort, safety, and avoidance. It wants immediate emotional relief. It wants to escape discomfort. But discipline interrupts this pattern. Discipline teaches the brain that action can happen regardless of emotion. Over time, this changes identity completely. A person who only acts when they feel motivated remains emotionally weak because their behavior changes with every mood. But a person who acts consistently despite fear, laziness, doubt, or discomfort develops mental strength. They stop seeing emotions as commands that must always be obeyed. One of the greatest psychological benefits of discipline is that routines reduce anxiety. The human brain naturally seeks certainty and predictability. Chaos creates stress because the nervous system struggles with constant uncertainty. Discipline creates structure, and structure creates emotional stability. When daily habits become consistent, the mind feels calmer because it no longer wastes energy constantly deciding what to do. This is why disciplined people often appear mentally stronger under pressure. Their routines create emotional grounding. While others are controlled by emotional fluctuations, disciplined individuals continue following systems and habits that keep them stable. They rely less on mood and more on structure. For example, a disciplined person does not negotiate daily with fear about whether they should work, train, study, create, or improve themselves. The behavior becomes automatic through repetition. This reduces internal conflict because the brain no longer sees the activity as emotionally optional. Fear weakens through repetition because the nervous system adapts to what it experiences consistently. The first time something difficult is attempted, fear feels intense because the brain interprets uncertainty as danger, but repeated exposure changes the emotional response. The activity slowly becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces fear. This is why discipline creates confidence naturally. A person who consistently faces discomfort develops evidence that they are capable. The nervous system learns that challenge is survivable. Over time, fear loses emotional power because the brain stops treating the situation as threatening. A person terrified of exercise eventually becomes comfortable through routine. A person afraid of public speaking becomes calmer through repeated exposure. A person fearful of difficult conversations becomes emotionally stronger through practice. Repetition rewires emotional responses. What once created anxiety eventually feels normal. This process builds mental toughness. Mental toughness is not emotional numbness or pretending fear does not exist. It is the ability to continue functioning effectively despite discomfort. Mentally tough people still feel fear, stress, and uncertainty. The difference is that they no longer allow those feelings to completely control behavior. Consistency is what separates mentally strong people from emotionally reactive people. Anyone can act powerfully for one day when motivation is high, but true discipline appears during the difficult days, the days when emotions disappear, energy feels low, and discomfort becomes intense. This is where identity is shaped. Every disciplined action sends a message to the brain about who you are. Each time you keep a promise to yourself, self-trust grows. Each time you follow through despite resistance, your identity strengthens. Confidence is not built by thinking positively about yourself. Confidence is built by proving to yourself repeatedly that you can be trusted. This is why habits are so important psychologically. Habits remove the need for constant emotional decision-making. A person with strong habits does not rely on willpower every moment because behavior becomes automatic over time. Daily actions slowly shape identity without requiring endless motivation. A disciplined person wakes up and trains because it is part of who they are. They work on goals because consistency has become normal. They protect routines because routines protect mental clarity. Habits create momentum, and momentum reduces fear because action becomes familiar rather than emotionally overwhelming. Fear often grows strongest in inactivity. When people stop taking action, the mind fills empty space with doubt, overthinking, and emotional resistance. But disciplined action interrupts this mental cycle. Movement creates psychological momentum. The longer someone remains consistent, the less power fear has over daily behavior. Discipline also creates self-respect, and self-respect is one of the foundations of confidence. Many people secretly struggle with low self-worth because they repeatedly break promises to themselves. They constantly delay goals, abandon commitments, and surrender to temporary emotions. Over time, the brain loses trust in itself. Every broken promise weakens identity. The person begins seeing themselves as unreliable, weak, or incapable. This destroys confidence because confidence depends heavily on self-trust. If you cannot trust yourself to follow through consistently, fear becomes much stronger. But discipline repairs this relationship. Every time you keep a commitment despite discomfort, you build evidence of strength. You begin respecting yourself because your actions align with your intentions. Self-respect grows not from external praise but from internal consistency. This is why disciplined people often carry a quiet confidence. They know they can rely on themselves. They know they can continue moving even when emotions fluctuate. Their confidence is not based on temporary feelings, but on repeated evidence of resilience and consistency. Daily actions matter far more than dramatic moments because the mind is shaped through repetition. Small disciplines repeated consistently create enormous psychological change over time. Waking up when you said you would, exercising regularly, studying consistently, practicing self-control, managing emotions calmly, keeping promises, facing discomfort daily. These actions slowly strengthen the nervous system and build emotional resilience. Most people underestimate how deeply daily habits shape the mind. Every repeated behavior either strengthens fear or weakens it. Avoidance strengthens fear. Discipline weakens it. Emotional reactions strengthen weakness. Consistent action strengthens resilience. This is why discipline is freedom, not punishment. Many people view discipline as restrictive because they focus only on the temporary discomfort it requires. But discipline actually creates long-term freedom. It frees people from emotional chaos, procrastination, inconsistency, and fear-based living. A disciplined mind becomes calmer because it no longer depends entirely on emotion. The person gains control over behavior instead of being controlled by temporary feelings. They stop waiting for life to feel easy before taking action. They understand that growth often happens during uncomfortable moments. Fearless people are rarely fearless because they naturally feel less fear than others. They become fearless because discipline trained them to move despite fear repeatedly. They built habits that strengthened the nervous system. They developed routines that created emotional stability. They stopped negotiating constantly with discomfort and started acting consistently regardless of emotional resistance. Eventually, discipline transforms identity completely. The person no longer sees themselves as fragile or emotionally weak because they have built proof through action. Their confidence becomes grounded in behavior rather than emotion. And this is the true power of discipline. It teaches you that fear does not disappear because life becomes easier. Fear disappears because you become stronger. Chapter 8. The fearless mindset of high performers. Most people believe high performers are fearless because they were born different. They assume successful people naturally possess confidence, discipline, emotional strength, and mental clarity that ordinary individuals simply do not have. But this belief is completely false. Elite performers are not fearless because they never experience fear. They are fearless because they think differently about fear itself. The average person sees fear as a stop sign. High performers see fear as information. Ordinary minds interpret discomfort as danger, while elite minds interpret discomfort as growth. This single psychological difference changes everything. High performers understand that fear is often a signal that something important is happening. The fear of failure, rejection, uncertainty, or discomfort usually appears right before growth. Because of this, successful people stop treating fear as an enemy that must always be avoided. Instead, they learn how to function while fear exists. This mindset creates a massive advantage because most people spend their lives running away from discomfort. They avoid difficult conversations, opportunities, challenges, and risks because temporary emotional discomfort feels threatening. But elite performers understand that avoiding discomfort creates long-term suffering. They know short-term discomfort is often the price of long-term freedom, growth, and achievement. One of the biggest differences between average thinkers and high performers is emotional control under pressure. Most people completely change when stress appears. Pressure overwhelms their thinking, emotions hijack decisions, and fear controls behavior. Under pressure, they become reactive, impulsive, emotional, and mentally scattered. But elite performers train themselves to remain calm during uncertainty. They understand that emotional reactions reduce performance because stress weakens clear thinking. When emotions take over completely, logic disappears. This is why high performers develop the ability to pause before reacting. A professional athlete under pressure cannot allow panic to control movement. A business leader during crisis cannot allow fear to destroy decision-making. A surgeon during a difficult operation cannot become emotionally overwhelmed. In high-pressure situations, emotional control becomes a competitive advantage. The strongest minds are not the loudest or most aggressive. They are the calmest under chaos. They remain stable while others panic. They continue thinking clearly while others become emotionally reactive. This ability separates leaders from followers in nearly every area of life. High performers also think differently about time. Average people think emotionally and short-term. Elite performers think strategically and long-term. Emotional thinking focuses on immediate comfort, temporary feelings, and short-term relief. Long-term thinking focuses on future consequences, growth, and larger outcomes. For example, most people avoid difficult tasks because they feel uncomfortable right now. They procrastinate because immediate emotional relief feels rewarding. But high performers ask a different question. They ask what happens if this behavior continues for years. They think in terms of long-term identity rather than temporary emotion. This mindset completely changes behavior. Temporary discomfort becomes easier to tolerate when connected to a larger vision. Elite performers understand that success is usually built through consistent actions repeated over long periods of time. They stop expecting immediate emotional rewards and become comfortable with delayed gratification. This is why successful people often appear more patient than average individuals. They are willing to endure discomfort today for a better future tomorrow. While others seek immediate pleasure, they focus on long-term transformation. Another major difference is resilience. Most people see failure as evidence that they are not good enough. High performers see failure as feedback. This psychological distinction is incredibly important because setbacks are unavoidable in every meaningful pursuit. People who fear failure emotionally collapse when things go wrong. They take rejection personally. They interpret setbacks as proof of weakness. One failure becomes an identity crisis. But resilient individuals think differently. They separate events from identity. A failed business does not mean they are failures. Rejection does not mean they are worthless. Mistakes do not define their value. They understand that setbacks are part of growth, not proof that growth is impossible. This is why elite performers recover faster emotionally. They do not waste months trapped in shame, self-pity, or overthinking. Instead, they focus on learning, adjusting, and moving forward. Their energy goes into adaptation rather than emotional suffering. the psychology of resilience is deeply connected to meaning. People become mentally stronger when they connect pain to purpose. Temporary struggles become easier to endure when they serve something important. High performers often survive intense pressure because they focus on mission rather than emotion. This does not mean successful people never feel discouraged. They absolutely do, but they refuse to let temporary emotions permanently stop progress. They understand that difficult emotions are temporary states, not permanent truths. Another powerful characteristic of elite performers is that they fail faster than most people. This sounds strange because society teaches people to avoid failure at all costs. But high achievers understand something most people never realize. Avoiding failure often guarantees stagnation. Fearful people spend enormous amounts of time trying to avoid mistakes. They overthink endlessly, wait for perfect certainty, and delay action until conditions feel safe. But certainty rarely exists in real life. Because of this, many people remain stuck for years while waiting to feel fully ready. High performers move faster because they understand that action creates information. Instead of endlessly thinking about possibilities, they test ideas in reality. If something fails, they learn quickly and adjust. Failure becomes data rather than emotional destruction. This creates enormous long-term advantages. Someone who attempts 10 things learns far more than someone who only thinks about attempting one thing. High performers improve rapidly because they shorten the gap between action, feedback, and adjustment. This mindset also reduces fear psychologically. Fear grows strongest in imagination. Overthinking magnifies uncertainty because the brain creates endless worst-case scenarios. But action interrupts mental fear loops. Once movement begins, the mind gathers real-world evidence instead of imaginary danger. Adaptability is another critical trait of fearless individuals. Most people struggle emotionally because they become rigid. They want certainty, control, and predictability. When life changes unexpectedly, they panic because their identity depends on stability. But high performers understand that change is inevitable. Instead of resisting uncertainty, they train themselves to adapt. Mental flexibility becomes a survival skill. They stop expecting life to remain comfortable and predictable all the time. Adaptable people recover faster because they do not waste energy fighting reality. They accept situations quickly and focus on solutions instead of denial. This ability allows them to continue progressing even during difficult circumstances. The modern world changes constantly. Technology evolves, industries shift, opportunities disappear, and new challenges emerge rapidly. People who cannot adapt become trapped emotionally because they depend too heavily on familiarity. But flexible minds continue growing because they are willing to evolve. High performers also turn setbacks into fuel. Instead of allowing pain to weaken them, they use pain as motivation for transformation. Rejection becomes motivation for improvement. Failure becomes motivation for discipline. Criticism becomes motivation for growth. This ability to transform adversity into energy is one of the defining traits of mentally strong individuals. Most people allow setbacks to destroy momentum. Elite performers use setbacks to strengthen momentum. Pain often creates clarity. Difficult experiences reveal weaknesses, priorities, and hidden potential. High performers understand this deeply. They stop asking why difficult things happen to them and start asking what the experience can teach them. Over time, this creates emotional toughness that average people rarely develop. The person who repeatedly survives discomfort becomes less controlled by fear. Challenges stop feeling like proof of weakness and start feeling like opportunities to grow stronger. This is the fearless mindset, not the absence of fear, not pretending to be confident all the time, not becoming emotionally numb. True fearlessness is the ability to continue moving forward despite uncertainty, discomfort, rejection, pressure, and setbacks. It is the ability to think clearly when emotions become intense. It is the ability to stay focused on long-term goals instead of temporary feelings. It is the ability to transform pain into growth instead of allowing pain to create paralysis. And this mindset is not reserved for a special group of people. It is built through practice, repetition, emotional discipline, and the willingness to keep moving when most people stop. Chapter 9. Your environment programs. Your fear. Most people believe fear is created entirely inside the mind. They think anxiety, insecurity, overthinking, and self-doubt are purely personal problems caused by weakness or lack of confidence. But what most people fail to understand is that your environment silently shapes your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and fears every single day. The people around you, the information you consume, the conversations you hear, the content you watch, and the emotional energy surrounding your life all program your mindset in ways you rarely notice. Human beings are highly adaptable creatures. Your brain constantly absorbs emotional patterns from your surroundings without conscious awareness. This is why two people living in completely different environments often develop completely different levels of confidence, ambition, emotional stability, and fear. Environment influences identity more than most people realize. If you spend enough time in fearful environments, your thinking becomes fearful. If you constantly surround yourself with negativity, anxiety slowly becomes normal. If the people around you avoid risk, complain constantly, fear judgment, and think pessimistically, your brain starts adapting to those emotional patterns. Over time, fear no longer feels unusual. It feels natural. Negative environments quietly shape your perception of reality. They teach your brain to focus on danger instead of opportunity. Instead of seeing growth, possibility, and improvement, you begin noticing problems, risks, failures, and limitations everywhere. Fearful environments condition your nervous system to expect stress and uncertainty constantly. This is one reason why many people struggle to grow even after reading motivational books, watching inspiring videos, or learning self-improvement techniques. They try to improve mentally while remaining trapped in environments that continuously reinforce fear-based thinking. Growth becomes extremely difficult when your surroundings constantly pull you backward emotionally. Your environment affects not only your thoughts but also your emotional state. Human emotions are contagious. Psychologists often refer to this as emotional contagion. The emotions of people around you influence your nervous system automatically. Spend enough time around anxious people, and your anxiety increases. Spend enough time around angry, negative, pessimistic individuals, and your emotional energy slowly becomes heavier. This happens because the brain is designed for social survival. Humans evolved in tribes, meaning emotional awareness became essential for protection. Your nervous system constantly scans other people's emotional states to determine whether situations feel safe or threatening. Even today, your brain mirrors emotional patterns from the people around you without conscious permission. This explains why some environments drain your energy while others inspire you. Some people make you feel emotionally exhausted after only a short interaction. Others leave you feeling calmer, stronger, and more motivated. Their emotional patterns directly affect your mental state. Toxic relationships are one of the most destructive environmental influences on fear. Fear grows rapidly around people who constantly criticize, manipulate, shame, discourage, or emotionally control others. Toxic individuals create insecurity by making people doubt themselves repeatedly. Over time, Confidence weakens because the nervous system remains stuck in emotional defense mode. Many people never realize how much their fear is connected to the relationship surrounding them. Constant criticism creates fear of judgment. Emotional unpredictability creates anxiety. Manipulation creates self-doubt. Toxic comparison creates insecurity. Fearful people often become even more fearful when surrounded by emotionally unhealthy individuals. This becomes especially dangerous in close relationships because repeated emotional experiences shape identity. If someone constantly makes you feel small, incapable, or emotionally unsafe, your brain eventually begins accepting those feelings as truth. Your environment starts programming limitation into your self-image. Fear also grows in environments filled with constant chaos and emotional instability. When life feels unpredictable all the time, the nervous system becomes hyper-alert. This creates chronic stress and anxiety. The brain starts expecting danger even when no immediate threat exists. Emotional exhaustion becomes normal because the mind never fully relaxes. Modern life intensifies this problem through information overload. Most people consume enormous amounts of negative information every single day without realizing its psychological impact. News headlines focus on fear because fear captures attention. Social media amplifies insecurity because comparison generates emotional reactions. Constant notifications overstimulate the brain and keep the nervous system in a permanent state of alertness. The human brain was never designed to process endless streams of emotional stimulation. Thousands of years ago, humans worried about immediate physical survival. Today, people absorb fear from global problems, social comparison, online judgment, financial uncertainty, and endless digital stimulation simultaneously. This creates chronic mental fatigue. Information overload weakens emotional stability because the brain never fully rests. Constant exposure to negativity trains the mind to expect disaster. Fear slowly becomes a background emotional state. Many people wake up anxious not because their lives are actually dangerous, but because their minds are overloaded with stress signals every day. Social media makes this even worse by creating unrealistic comparisons. People constantly compare their lives to edited versions of other people's success, beauty, confidence, and achievement. This creates insecurity, self-doubt, and emotional pressure. Fear of missing out, fear of judgment, and fear of inadequacy become stronger because the mind constantly feels behind. The problem is not technology itself. The problem is unconscious consumption. Most people allow information to enter their minds without boundaries or awareness. They consume emotional poison daily and then wonder why they feel anxious, overwhelmed, and mentally exhausted. Protecting your mental energy becomes essential if you want to develop fearlessness. Fear grows strongest when your mind is overloaded, emotionally drained, and constantly stimulated. A powerful mind requires emotional space, clarity, and intentional focus. This means learning to protect your attention carefully. Attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess because whatever consistently captures your attention shapes your thinking. If fear-based information dominates your attention, fear dominates your mindset. If growth-focused information dominates your attention, growth dominates your mindset. Fearless people become extremely selective about what they allow into their minds. They understand that mental energy is limited. They avoid constant negativity because they know emotional states are contagious. They limit meaningless distractions because overstimulation weakens focus and emotional stability. This does not mean isolating yourself from reality or pretending problems do not exist. It means choosing inputs intentionally instead of unconsciously absorbing everything around you. Strong minds understand that protecting mental clarity is necessary for emotional strength. Building a growth-oriented environment is one of the fastest ways to transform fear-based thinking. Growth-oriented environments encourage learning, resilience, discipline, and possibility. They push people toward improvement instead of emotional stagnation. The people surrounding you matter enormously. If you spend time with ambitious, emotionally disciplined, growth-focused individuals, your mindset naturally shifts upward. You begin thinking differently because new emotional standards influence your behavior. Confidence becomes more normal. Courage becomes more normal. Action becomes more normal. This is why high performers carefully choose their environment. They understand that success is not only personal effort. Environment either strengthens or weakens mental growth every single day. A growth-oriented environment also includes your physical surroundings. Clean, organized spaces often reduce mental stress and improve focus. Chaotic environments increase emotional overwhelm. Your surroundings influence your nervous system more than you realize. Your daily habits are also part of your environment. Sleep quality, movement, nutrition, media consumption, and routines all affect emotional stability. Fear increases when the body is exhausted, overstimulated, and neglected. A healthy lifestyle creates a stronger nervous system capable of handling stress more effectively. Designing a fearless lifestyle means intentionally building systems that support emotional strength. It means reducing unnecessary chaos. It means creating routines that calm the mind instead of overstimulating it. It means surrounding yourself with people who inspire growth instead of fear. Fearless living is not about becoming reckless or emotionless. It is about creating conditions where courage becomes easier and fear loses control over your behavior. Most people try to fight fear directly while continuing to live in environments that constantly produce fear. This creates an endless internal battle. But when your environment supports clarity, discipline, growth, and emotional stability, fear naturally weakens over time. Your environment is either programming courage or programming fear every single day. Every conversation, every habit, every relationship, every piece of content, and every emotional experience is shaping the person you are becoming. If you want to become fearless, you cannot ignore the environment shaping your mind, because eventually the life around you becomes the voice inside your head. Chapter 10. Mastering Fear in High Pressure Situations. Fear becomes most visible when pressure rises. It is easy to feel confident when life feels comfortable, predictable, and safe. But high-pressure situations reveal the true condition of the mind. The moment stakes become real, fear begins testing emotional control, self-belief, focus, and discipline. This is why many people perform far below their potential during important moments. Fear overwhelms their thinking before the challenge even begins. Presentations, interviews, public speaking, difficult conversations, competitions, deadlines, leadership responsibilities, financial risks, and major life decisions all create psychological pressure because the brain interprets uncertainty as danger. The mind begins imagining failure, embarrassment, rejection, criticism, or loss. As these thoughts intensify, the nervous system activates survival mode. This process happens automatically. Your heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tighten, palms sweat, and thoughts become scattered. The body prepares for danger even when no physical threat exists. Modern pressure is usually psychological, but the brain still responds as if survival is at risk. This is why intelligent people sometimes freeze under pressure. Knowledge disappears, confidence collapses. Simple tasks suddenly feel difficult. Fear hijacks attention, and weakens clear thinking. Most people assume fearless individuals never feel nervous in these situations, but that is not true. Fearless people feel pressure too. The difference is that they know how to manage their internal state while pressure exists. They do not allow fear to control behavior completely. One of the most important skills in life is learning how to stay calm under pressure. Calmness is not weakness, it is emotional strength. When the mind stays calm, thinking becomes clearer, decisions become smarter, and performance improves dramatically. Pressure itself is not always the problem. Often, the real problem is resistance to pressure. The more people panic about feeling nervous, the worse fear becomes. They begin fighting their own emotions instead of managing them. This creates a second layer of stress that intensifies anxiety even further. High performers understand something powerful. Nervousness is energy. The body is preparing for action. The goal is not to eliminate this energy completely, but to direct it effectively. Fear and excitement create very similar physiological responses. Both increase alertness, focus, and energy levels. The interpretation changes the experience. People who collapse under pressure often tell themselves they are not ready, not capable, or about to fail. Their internal dialogue strengthens fear. But people who perform well under pressure reinterpret the situation differently. They see pressure as preparation instead of danger. They view challenges as opportunities instead of threats. This mental shift changes performance significantly because the brain follows interpretation. Thoughts influence physiology. If your mind constantly repeats that something is dangerous, your nervous system responds with panic. But if you interpret pressure as a challenge you are capable of handling, the nervous system becomes more stable. One of the most effective ways to control fear under pressure is through nervous system regulation. Fear always affects the body first. Before thoughts fully spiral, physical changes begin appearing. Heartbeat increases, breathing shortens, muscles tense, and focus narrows. Learning to regulate the body helps calm the mind. Breathing is one of the fastest ways to influence emotional state because breath directly affects the nervous system. Most people breathe incorrectly when anxious. Their breathing becomes shallow and rapid, which signals danger to the brain. This increases stress further. Slow, controlled breathing sends the opposite message. It signals safety. Deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps calm the body and restore mental clarity. This is why breathing techniques are used by athletes, military personnel, performers, and elite professionals in high-pressure environments. One powerful method is controlled box breathing. Inhale slowly for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, then pause for 4 seconds before repeating. This technique slows the nervous system and improves focus. Even a few minutes of controlled breathing can dramatically reduce anxiety. Grounding techniques are also extremely effective during pressure situations. Fear often pulls the mind into imagined future scenarios. People start visualizing embarrassment, failure, rejection, or disaster before anything has actually happened. Grounding interrupts this mental spiral by reconnecting attention to the present moment. Simple grounding methods work surprisingly well. Focus on physical sensations. Feel your feet against the floor. Notice your breathing. Observe objects around you. Listen carefully to sounds in the environment. Bringing awareness back to the present weakens catastrophic thinking because fear survives through imagined futures. Another important technique is simplifying focus. Under pressure, the mind often becomes overwhelmed because it tries to control too many things simultaneously. During presentations, for example, people think about audience reactions, mistakes, judgment, body language, future consequences, and self-image all at once. This mental overload destroys performance. High performers narrow focus strategically. Instead of trying to control everything, they focus only on the next action. One sentence, one breath, one question, one step. Simplified focus prevents emotional overwhelm and improves execution. Strategic thinking under stress is another defining characteristic of fearless individuals. Emotional people react impulsively under pressure because survival instincts dominate behavior. Strategic individuals slow themselves down mentally before responding. This pause is powerful. When pressure rises, most people react automatically. They speak too quickly, make emotional decisions, panic, or avoid action completely. But mentally strong individuals create space between emotion and response. Even a few seconds of pause can completely change the outcome of a situation. This is especially important during conflict or difficult conversations. Pressure often pushes people toward defensiveness, anger, or emotional reactions they later regret, but composure allows logic to remain active. Calm people think more clearly, communicate better, and make stronger decisions. Building composure requires practice. Composure is not a personality trait people are simply born with. It is a trained emotional skill developed through repeated exposure to discomfort. Every time you remain calm during pressure, instead of reacting emotionally, your nervous system becomes stronger. This is why confidence grows through experience. The brain learns through evidence. Each time you survive pressure successfully, fear loses some of its control. Over time, situations that once felt overwhelming begin feeling manageable. Many people avoid pressure because they fear discomfort. But avoidance strengthens fear. The nervous system never learns adaptation because challenges are constantly escaped. Fear grows whenever the brain learns that avoidance equals safety. Exposure weakens fear instead. The more you intentionally face pressure, the more your nervous system adapts. Public speaking becomes easier after repeated exposure. Difficult conversations become less intimidating. Interviews become less overwhelming. Pressure loses intensity because the brain stops interpreting the situation as dangerous. This does not mean fear disappears completely. Even highly successful individuals still feel pressure before important moments. The difference is that they trust themselves to function despite discomfort. Another important mindset shift involves redefining failure. Pressure becomes unbearable when people treat mistakes as emotional disasters. Fear intensifies because identity feels threatened. But strong minds understand that mistakes are part of growth, not proof of inadequacy. When failure stops meaning personal weakness, pressure loses much of its emotional power. High performers also focus heavily on preparation because preparation reduces uncertainty. Fear increases when the mind feels unprepared. Deep preparation creates psychological stability because confidence grows from competence. But preparation alone is not enough. Some people prepare endlessly, yet still panic because they never train emotional control itself. True confidence comes from combining preparation with emotional discipline. The ultimate goal is not to become fearless by eliminating all anxiety. The goal is to become someone who can think clearly and act effectively even while feeling pressure. This is real courage. Anyone can stay calm when nothing is at risk. But composure during uncertainty, stress, fear, and high stakes is what creates powerful individuals. Pressure reveals character. It reveals whether emotions control you or whether you can control yourself despite emotions. And every moment of pressure is an opportunity to train the mind into becoming stronger, calmer, and more fearless than before. Chapter 11. The Power of Non-Reaction. Most people believe power comes from reacting strongly. They think dominance means speaking louder, arguing harder, defending themselves immediately, or emotionally proving their point. Modern culture often rewards emotional impulsiveness because dramatic reactions attract attention. But true emotional strength works very differently. Real power is often quiet. Calmness is power. Self-control is power. Non-reaction is power. One of the biggest signs of emotional weakness is the inability to control reactions. When people become emotionally triggered by every criticism, disagreement, inconvenience, or stressful situation, they lose control over themselves. Their emotions begin controlling their behavior automatically. Instead of thinking clearly, they react impulsively. Instead of choosing responses intentionally, they become prisoners of temporary feelings. Most emotional reactions happen automatically because the brain interprets emotional discomfort as a threat. The moment someone criticizes you, disrespects you, rejects you, or challenges your identity, the nervous system activates survival responses. Anger rises quickly. Defensiveness appears immediately. The urge to attack, explain, or prove yourself becomes intense. But reacting emotionally often creates more damage than the original problem itself. A single emotional outburst can destroy trust, relationships, opportunities, and reputation within minutes. Many people lose respect not because they lacked intelligence or ability, but because they lacked emotional control. They allowed temporary emotions to create permanent consequences. This is why non-reaction is such a powerful skill. Non-reaction does not mean weakness, passiveness, or emotional suppression. It means maintaining control over yourself even when emotions become intense. It means refusing to let external situations dictate your internal state. Emotionally strong people understand that not every situation deserves a reaction. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. Weak people often fear silence because silence feels uncomfortable. They feel the need to explain themselves constantly, defend their image, or respond immediately to every challenge. But emotionally mature individuals understand that silence can communicate confidence, stability, and control more powerfully than endless emotional reactions. When someone insults you, and you react emotionally, you hand them power over your emotions. They now control your state of mind. Your peace becomes dependent on their behavior. But when you remain calm, you keep your power. You demonstrate emotional independence. This is why emotionally reactive people are easier to manipulate. Their emotions can be controlled externally. Anger, fear, insecurity, or ego push them into predictable behavior. But calm individuals become difficult to manipulate because they pause before reacting. They think before responding. Strategic patience is another powerful form of emotional control. Most people act impulsively because emotions create urgency. Anger demands immediate expression. Anxiety demands immediate relief. Fear demands immediate escape. But impulsive decisions are rarely intelligent decisions. Patience creates space for clarity. When emotions are intense, thinking becomes distorted. Small problems appear catastrophic. Temporary feelings feel permanent. Emotional people often regret actions taken during moments of anger, fear, or insecurity because emotional intensity weakens rational judgment. Strategic patience interrupts this process. Instead of reacting immediately, emotionally disciplined individuals slow themselves down intentionally. They wait before speaking. They breathe before responding. They allow emotional intensity to decrease before making decisions. This single habit changes lives. Many arguments, broken relationships, and destructive decisions could be avoided through simple emotional patience. The ability to pause creates emotional freedom because it separates feeling from action. Handling criticism calmly is one of the clearest demonstrations of emotional strength. Most people become defensive immediately when criticized because criticism threatens ego and identity. The mind interprets criticism as personal attack instead of information. But emotionally strong individuals approach criticism differently. They understand that emotional reactions often block learning. Defensiveness prevents growth because the mind focuses on protecting ego instead of seeking truth. This does not mean every criticism is valid. Some criticism is unfair, emotional, or intentionally harmful. But reacting emotionally still weakens your position. Calmness creates clarity. It allows you to evaluate feedback rationally instead of emotionally. People who master non-reaction become much harder to emotionally disturb because their inner stability no longer depends heavily on external approval. They stop needing everyone to validate them constantly. This creates enormous psychological freedom. One reason criticism hurts people so deeply is because many individuals build identity around external validation. Their self-worth depends heavily on how others perceive them. As a result, rejection, disagreement, or judgment feel emotionally dangerous. But inner confidence changes this dynamic completely. When your identity becomes internally grounded, criticism loses much of its emotional power. You no longer feel compelled to defend yourself against every opinion because your self-worth is not entirely controlled by external reactions. Responding instead of exploding is one of the defining traits of emotionally intelligent individuals. Explosive reactions may feel powerful in the moment, but they usually reveal emotional instability rather than strength. True emotional power comes from remaining composed while others lose control. This becomes especially important during conflict. Emotional explosions rarely solve problems. They usually intensify tension, create defensiveness, and damage trust. Calm responses create the possibility for understanding and resolution. A composed person can completely change the emotional direction of a conversation. Calmness often de-escalates situations because emotional energy tends to mirror itself. Aggression creates aggression. Anxiety creates anxiety. But calmness can interrupt emotional escalation. This is why emotionally stable people often become natural leaders. Others trust individuals who remain steady under pressure. Calm individuals create psychological safety because their behavior feels predictable and grounded. The psychology of inner peace is deeply connected to non-reaction. Inner peace does not come from controlling every external situation. That is impossible. Life will always contain uncertainty, criticism, setbacks, and emotional challenges. Real peace comes from controlling your responses instead of trying to control the world. Most suffering is amplified through resistance. People resist discomfort emotionally. They fight reality mentally. They replay situations endlessly in their minds. Overthinking strengthens emotional pain because the mind continuously feeds negative emotional loops. Non-reaction weakens this cycle. Instead of feeding emotional storms constantly, emotionally disciplined people allow emotions to pass without identifying completely with them. They observe feelings without becoming consumed by them. This creates emotional detachment, which is not emotional numbness. Emotional detachment means emotions no longer dominate identity and behavior completely. Feelings become experiences rather than commands. Becoming emotionally untouchable does not mean becoming cold, emotionless, or disconnected from life. It means developing such strong internal stability that external situations lose the ability to control your inner peace easily. Emotionally untouchable people still feel emotions deeply. They feel anger, sadness, fear, disappointment, and frustration like everyone else, but they no longer become controlled by those emotions automatically. This emotional freedom creates extraordinary mental strength. The person who cannot be easily emotionally manipulated becomes powerful in every area of life. They think more clearly. They make better decisions. They protect relationships more effectively. They handle stress better. They maintain peace while others remain trapped in emotional chaos. Non-reaction also creates clarity about what truly matters. Many people waste enormous emotional energy reacting to things that ultimately have little importance. Arguments online, random opinions, temporary criticism, and meaningless conflicts consume mental energy unnecessarily. Emotionally mature individuals become selective about where they invest emotional attention. They stop reacting to everything. They understand that attention is valuable and emotional energy is limited. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every insult deserves your anger. Not every misunderstanding deserves emotional war. Sometimes the strongest response is calm silence. Sometimes the greatest power is refusing to emotionally participate in chaos. And sometimes the moment you stop reacting impulsively is the moment you finally take control of your life. Chapter 12. Becoming mentally unstoppable. Most people spend their lives trying to change their behavior without ever changing their identity. They attempt to become more confident, disciplined, fearless, or successful, while still internally seeing themselves as weak, anxious, uncertain, or incapable. This creates constant internal conflict, because your identity always pulls your behavior back toward what feels familiar. Real transformation begins when identity changes. The mind constantly acts in alignment with self-image. If you believe deep down that you are fearful, emotionally unstable, or incapable, your behavior unconsciously follows those beliefs. But when identity begins shifting, behavior changes naturally because actions start aligning with a new internal standard. This is why becoming mentally unstoppable is not just about motivation. Motivation is temporary and emotional. Identity is deeper. Identity shapes long-term behavior automatically. Fearful people often say things like, "I'm just an anxious person," "I've never been confident," or "I'm not mentally strong." These statements may feel harmless, but they become psychological instructions for the brain. The mind constantly searches for evidence to confirm identity. Over time, repeated beliefs reinforce emotional patterns until fear becomes part of personality. But identity is not fixed. The brain is constantly adapting based on repeated thoughts, actions, and emotional experiences. Every courageous decision slowly rewires self-image. Every difficult situation survived successfully becomes new evidence for the mind. Confidence grows when the brain repeatedly sees proof that you can handle discomfort instead of escaping it. This process takes time, but it changes everything. Mentally unstoppable people are not born with special brains. They build stronger identities through repeated exposure to challenge, discomfort, and growth. Over time, they stop identifying as victims of fear and start identifying as people capable of handling difficult situations. This creates what psychologists often call anti-fragile thinking. Most people are fragile mentally. Pressure weakens them, stress overwhelms them, failure destroys momentum. Criticism damages confidence. Challenges become evidence that they are not strong enough. But anti-fragile individuals become stronger through adversity. Instead of breaking under pressure, they adapt. Instead of collapsing after setbacks, they grow. Difficult experiences become fuel for development instead of emotional destruction. Challenges no longer feel like proof of weakness. They become opportunities for transformation. This mindset completely changes the relationship with fear. Fear stops becoming something that must always be avoided. Instead, fear becomes training. Every difficult moment becomes a chance to strengthen emotional control, discipline, resilience, and courage. Anti-fragile people understand that comfort rarely creates strength. Growth is built through resistance. This is why mentally unstoppable individuals stop asking how to avoid discomfort and start asking how to become stronger through discomfort. The compound effect of courage is one of the most powerful forces in personal transformation. Small acts of courage may seem insignificant in the moment, but over time they completely reshape identity and life direction. Every time you speak despite fear, confidence grows slightly. Every time you face discomfort instead of avoiding it, emotional strength increases slightly. Every time you stay calm under pressure, self-trust deepens slightly. These small moments accumulate over months and years. Courage compounds exactly like habits, investments, or skills. Tiny daily decisions slowly create extraordinary transformation. Most people underestimate this process because they focus too heavily on dramatic change. They want instant confidence, instant fearlessness, or instant emotional mastery. But lasting mental strength is built gradually through repeated action. Fear shrinks every time the brain sees evidence that survival is possible despite discomfort. The opposite is also true. Avoidance compounds too. Every avoided conversation, ignored opportunity, delayed decision, or escaped challenge teaches the brain that fear should control behavior. Over time, life becomes smaller because avoidance trains weakness into the nervous system. Courage expands life. Avoidance contracts life. Mentally unstoppable people understand this deeply. They know that short-term discomfort often creates long-term freedom, while short-term avoidance creates long-term limitation. Self-trust is another essential foundation of mental strength. Most people do not fully trust themselves because they repeatedly abandon their own goals, promises, and values. They say they will change, but avoid action. They make commitments, then quit when emotions become uncomfortable. Over time, this weakens self-respect because the mind stops believing its own words. Self-trust is built through consistency. Every time you follow through, despite discomfort, trust strengthens. Every disciplined action becomes evidence that you can rely on yourself. Mentally unstoppable people develop deep inner confidence because they repeatedly prove to themselves that they can handle difficulty without collapsing emotionally. This creates powerful emotional stability. When you trust yourself, uncertainty becomes less frightening because you stop depending entirely on external conditions for security. You know that even if situations become difficult, you will adapt and continue moving forward. Self-respect grows through the same process. Many people search for confidence externally through validation, attention, status, or approval. But real confidence grows internally through behavior that aligns with values and integrity. You respect yourself when you become disciplined. You respect yourself when you remain calm instead of emotionally reactive. You respect yourself when you choose growth over comfort. You respect yourself when your actions match your standards. Fear loses control when self-respect becomes stronger than emotional avoidance. Living with purpose instead of fear is another defining characteristic of mentally unstoppable individuals. Fear dominates people most when they lack direction. Without purpose, comfort becomes the highest priority. The mind focuses excessively on avoiding discomfort because there is nothing larger worth pursuing. But purpose changes emotional priorities. When people connect deeply to meaningful goals, values, missions, or responsibilities, they become capable of tolerating much greater discomfort. Purpose creates endurance because pain now serves something important. This is why many extraordinary individuals endure immense pressure, sacrifice, and adversity without giving up. Their purpose becomes stronger than temporary emotional discomfort. Fear still exists, but it no longer controls decisions completely. Fearless decision-making does not mean never feeling uncertain. It means refusing to let fear become the final authority over your life choices. Most people wait until fear disappears before acting, but fear often disappears only after action begins. Mentally unstoppable people make decisions based on values, logic, growth, and long-term vision rather than temporary emotional comfort. They ask powerful questions. Will this choice help me grow? Will I regret avoiding this later? Am I acting from courage or fear? What kind of person does this decision help me become? These questions shift thinking away from emotional survival and toward intentional living. Over time, this creates a completely different mental operating system. Most people operate through unconscious emotional programming. Fear controls attention. Anxiety controls decisions. External validation controls self-worth. Comfort controls behavior. But mentally unstoppable individuals intentionally redesign their internal system. They build habits that strengthen discipline. They protect their environment carefully. They regulate emotional reactions consciously. They choose thoughts intentionally. They train resilience through discomfort. They stop feeding fear constantly through avoidance and overthinking. This new mental operating system changes how they experience life itself. Challenges become opportunities instead of threats. Pressure becomes training instead of panic. Failure becomes feedback instead of identity. Criticism becomes information instead of emotional destruction. Fear becomes energy instead of paralysis. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is built through consistent practice, emotional awareness, courage, discipline, and repetition. But eventually, something powerful happens. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to become fearless. You begin seeing yourself as someone capable of handling whatever life brings. And that changes everything. Because mentally unstoppable people are not unstoppable because life becomes easy. They are unstoppable because they stop allowing fear to decide who they become. Conclusion: fear never fully disappears, but you become stronger. Fear is part of being human. It always has been. From the beginning of human history, fear existed to protect survival. Your brain was designed to detect danger, avoid uncertainty, and keep you safe. That part of you will never completely disappear. Even the strongest, most confident, and most successful people still experience fear. They still feel pressure, doubt, uncertainty, and discomfort. The difference is not the absence of fear. The difference is how they respond to it. Most people spend their lives waiting to feel fearless before taking action. But courage does not work that way. Courage is acting despite fear. Courage is moving forward while uncertainty still exists. Courage is speaking when your voice shakes, trying when failure feels possible, and continuing when discomfort tells you to stop. This is where true freedom begins. The moment you stop allowing fear to control your decisions, your entire life starts changing. Emotional mastery creates freedom because you are no longer trapped by every feeling, every anxious thought, or every temporary emotional reaction. You stop becoming controlled by fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of judgment, and fear of uncertainty. Instead, you begin responding intentionally rather than reacting automatically. Your future is not determined by your fears. It is determined by your responses to those fears. Every small decision matters more than you realize. Every moment of courage slowly rewires your identity. Every difficult conversation you face, every challenge you stop avoiding, every uncomfortable action you take builds a stronger version of yourself. Transformation does not happen through one dramatic moment. It happens through small daily actions repeated consistently over time. This is the compound effect of courage and discipline. Fearless people are not born different. They are trained through repetition, discomfort, setbacks, pressure, and growth. They become strong because they stop running from the very experiences that build strength. Over time, they develop self-trust, resilience, emotional control, and inner stability that most people never experience because most people never face themselves deeply enough. But you can. You can train your mind. You can strengthen your emotional control. You can stop letting fear decide the direction of your life. And the process begins the moment you choose action over avoidance. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel perfectly ready. Now. Because every day you delay is another day fear continues controlling your potential. And every day you act despite fear is another day you become stronger than it.